Hello, my name is Leah McSweeney, and this is my Intro to Aerospace final report for the glider project. The requirements of this project was to create a glider that is primarily made of balsa wood, can be hand-thrown, it can fit in a box of 16 by 16 inches, must have wings, and must be able to fly at least 20 feet. The basic but unspoken requirements is to have a fuselage, vertical stabilizer, and horizontal stabilizer. These parts are key to having a successful glider. The first part of this project was to do research, and I had to do lots and lots of research to find the perfect parts. And specifically, I was looking at the wings, and in particular, the wing airfoils is what I started with. And to get the most optimal airfoil shape, most gliders have a symmetric shape, which is kind of like a teardrop looking shape. But because we're working with balsa wood, it is very thin and very hard to be able to shave it down to get that perfect airfoil. So what I wanted to go for was instead a more flat wing profile. This would be easier to build, have simple behavior in the air, less instability, and be more predictable. The next part of the wing I looked at is the wing shape, and I wanted to go with a tapered wing because it reduces drag more than a rectangular shaped wing, and as it is not as efficient as an elliptical, it is most likely to be symmetrical and overall easier to create. Specifically, I wanted a trailing edge taper. This adds more stability, and while this can cause my gliders to be less maneuverable, it is not as important because I am flying my glider just straight. Support is overall more important. The next part of my wing that I researched are the dimensions. I used the aspect ratio equation to calculate the most optimal size for the trailing edge tapered wings, and this equation was b squared over a, where b is the wingspan and a is the surface area of the wings. I wanted a wingspan of 16 inches so that the wing can be as big as possible to fit in the 16 by 16 inch box and create as much surface area as possible for the optimal lift. From my research, I found that the best aspect ratio is around 7, so the higher the AR, the better, but too high could cause the balsa wood to break. The next step was to look at the wing placement. The most optimal position for the wing center of gravity is to be at 1/4 the chord length. My chord length for my wings was about 2.55 inches, and so 25% of that is about 6.64 inches. This means that I want to add Play-Doh to the front edge of my fuselage so that the center of gravity is going to be 0.64 inches from the leading edge of the wing. The next part of the wing I looked at is the dihedral, and what the dihedral is the angle the edge of the wing is lifted from being flat on the ground to create a more stable roll factor. After some research, I found the most optimal dihedral angle is 5 degrees. The next aspect of the glider was the tail, and from my research I found that a fuselage mounted tail would be most optimal. Since the wings are being placed at the top of the fuselage and not at the side or below, a fuselage mounted tail is most optimal to not get in the way of the velocity stream from the wings. Having the horizontal stabilizer be mounted on the fuselage also creates the most stability for the tail. And to size these tails, from my research, I found that the surface area of the horizontal stabilizer should be a little over half the surface area of the wings. A little over half of 16 is 9. And from here, I decided to keep my wing shape simple and do a rectangular shape. And for the vertical stabilizer, I researched the optimal surface area is about 20% of the wing area. I wanted to create a simple trapezoidal shape. The last part is the fuselage, and the length of this should be around 65 to 75% of the wing. And I decided to go with 13 inches, which is 72.2% of the wingspan. And after all of this research, it was finally time to put my sketch into reality. And I did this by going to the makerspace, and I started with using CAD to create a design of my sketch in CAD that I will be able to then laser cut the wings and tail of my balsa wood to create the most definite shapes. I then started assembling my glider. The hardest part of this was to create a dihedral for my wings. My plan was to cut the wings in half and have the tip of the wings rest on blocks that would create a dihedral of 5 degrees. This plan was working, except for the fact that I used super glue and the adhesive was not drying. It would take over 24 hours and it was still not fully dry. In desperation, I went to the Hive for wood glue thinking this would help, but I could not successfully glue the wings down and have them keep their dihedral. The wings ended up falling flat. I decided to give up on the idea of having a dihedral, thinking it would be too hard to create, and I just tested my plane without the dihedral, adding Play-Doh to create the perfect center of gravity, which is right at the 1/4 chord length. of the wing. It flew pretty straight, and in this video you can see it reached about 20 to 35 feet.
Oh, there we go.
And after lots of testing, the wing sadly eventually broke off from the weak wood glue. This was very sad at first, seeing all my hard work being broken off, but overall was actually a good thing. I went back to the makerspace and decided to use hot glue for very fast drying. This hot glue was also thicker, and when I glued the wings down, I put blocks on each side like I did with the super glue, but this time it actually dried and created a 5-degree dihedral. The thick glue from the hot glue was very helpful and kept the wings at that optimal angle. This helped my glider fly much farther than it did before and create a more sinusoidal movement as it flew. One thing I noticed after more testing was the glider was not very balanced between the left and right wings. To help this, I added some Play-Doh to the left wing for the glider to stay straight in the air. And after lots of testing, I figured out how much Play-Doh to put at the front of my fuselage and on my left wing, and I was ready for the competition. When I flew the glider in the competition, it was outside and there was lots of wind. This was not accounted for in my testing, and my glider ended up only reaching 25 feet. While this was above the required 20 feet, I was determined to throw it farther. And after the competition, I got a video of my glider flying 85 feet. This was such an exciting moment to see everything to come together. And overall, I am very happy with my glider and the way it flew. While it wasn't a consistent glider each time I flew it, it demonstrated the sinusoidal movement that is looked for in a successful glider. After some further calculations on my glider, I found that lift coefficient was 0.36 and my drag coefficient was 0.006. This meant that my lift over drag ratio was 60. Overall, there were a couple things that I would change about the glider. The first would be to laser cut the wings down the middle. I think my glider wings were off balance because they were not laser cut to be equal, and instead I hand cut them and was probably a little bit off. The second thing would be to use nails or coins instead of Play-Doh. I think the Play-Doh dried quickly, and changing the way the plane flies every time is too unpredictable. I would use a heavier object that would not dry up or change as much. This was overall a really fun project where I got to see my research and ideas come together and got to fly my glider with my closest friends. Lastly, a list of my resources that I use for my research can be found here. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed my thought process and design for this glider project.